It's Wellness Wednesdays. It's Wellness Wednesdays. And yeah, we are talking about how to stop seeing your inner self as if you're still a high school nerd or any high school trope of your choice. Okay. This is because of the stuff brought up in the Joss Whedon thing, but also conversations I have with good people who, you know, when deep emotional discussions start coming out, the I was a nerd in high school thing comes up again and again and again. This is a really sticky part of people's identity. And so when I keep coming across these things, instead of going, they're just being ridiculous, I try to go, is there something here? Is there something I can unpack? Is this a thing we should be talking about? And that's what Wellness Wednesdays are for. Just as a note, the Leanna Care Service is open. What is the Leanna Care Service? It is, for $25, you get an hour of my time during certain days of the week. It's basically like a one-on-one version of Wellness Wednesday. So I'm not a therapist. I don't claim to be. I don't take a therapeutic approach. There are just some things in life that people would rather talk to somebody with some life experience than someone with a degree. That's what Leanna Cares is. The link to the Google form is in the description box below. There is a website coming, but like I said before, one of the people who's designing the website got COVID. So he's okay. He's getting better, but there was a delay there. So I decided to soft launch it. It's actually better to do it this way. We're going to have to incorporate Leanna Cares into the Patreon. My priority is the game, but, multitasking. So help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K. I'll figure something out with that. Anyway, onto the topic at hand. I bring this up because this is something people may want to extend a conversation about. I don't know. I realize I was sort of disabused of this myself in two really radical steps. And I think that experience may hopefully serve as a roadmap for people to do it in a way that's perhaps not so dramatic. Because the first step to me being separated from the high school nerd trope that I identified with was being the co-host of a highly sexualized late night show where I interviewed porn stars, and there was a hot tub and dancing girls, and I wore a lot of corsets and push-up bras and really big hair, right? Almost overnight, in my mid-20s, I went from being a ugly, fat nerd, but I was smart, to the hot girl, dumb slut. And even people who knew me from before treated me differently in work clothes. That was an experience. To experience that from the inside is really, really educational. And it really influenced my theories about gender and, the role of women in society and the role of men in society going forward. It had a really profound effect on me because I was the same person, but I never in my life thought I'd be treated like I was dumb. I was used to being treated like I was fat and ugly, but now, in Hollywood, nobody's thin enough, right? Like in media, everyone's too fat. But, I wasn't being treated like I was ugly anymore. But now I was being treated like I was dumb because I wasn't ugly. The world is weird. But I had to adapt to that, right? I had to recognize that people didn't know who I was in high school. They didn't want a high school nerd. They wanted the girl in the corsets and the push-up bras and the platform heels and the big hair. All right, I'm gonna be vaguely intelligent and it's a comedy show, so I'm gonna be funny in the corsets and push-up bras, but I knew my job. And I couldn't come at that from nerdy high schooler because that role required a certain confidence that doesn't come with being ignored unless people wanted help with their homework, right? So there went that. And then when I was done with that and wanted to go back into gaming, I was like, oh, I can just go back to being one of the nerds, right? Because in a lot of ways, I felt like I never really left. That was a performance. That wasn't really me. But I realized it wasn't so simple because, the powers that be in games journalism saw my Google search and all the cosplay stuff. And so they still thought I was a dumb slut. Games journalism was not at all kind to women to begin with back in those days. Much, much less nice to women than I have found the general gaming community has been since I jumped to YouTube and had more direct contact with gamers. And so there was that. And so it was this weird, okay, you're still essentially the dumb slut with video games, but you're doing game reviews, but know your place. You're not one of the guys who is supposed to talk about games. And then Gamergate happened and a bunch of really weird shit went down. Because Gamergate was this thing where people summed you up very, very quickly based on basically a Google search, and they were looking for shit to use against you. They were looking for keyword searches and tweets and anything to prove that you were just some bad actor. And I'm not singling one side or another out on this one. Both did it. Both were looking very, very intently on ways to just demolish people, to consolidate their position, because it was this weird turf war that sort of took on the mind of its own. Now, what I learned from that whole thing, yes, something positive did come out of it. What I learned came from talking to people who came at me really hard and weren't terribly nice to me at first. And I couldn't figure out why. And I was a reporter, even though I was treated like a dumb slut. And I was like, why are you doing this? Because, you go into a brain and you kind of expect some hostility from an interview subject. It's like, what is this? And what I gradually came to learn is that the identity I was communicating from and the identity people saw when they were receiving messages from me were not the same. And if I wanted to be a more effective communicator, I had to adopt a communication style that matched what people saw, not whatever sense of identity I had from before. And that was a really useful thing to learn. And I took the note, and one of the things that when you're, well, at least when I was doing game journalism, you could never let someone take a shot at you and have it unanswered, because you would get defined by that. People were always looking for reasons to dismiss, and because it was super competitive. Everybody wanted, because nobody made any money unless, you were at a handful of sites. And so it was all very competitive, and there's a lot of backstabbing. And, the number of people wanting access far outweighed the number of people who were granted access. So it was pretty cutthroat. And you couldn't let any, attack on you stand, which is what I came into YouTube with the paradigm. And people started telling me I couldn't handle criticism. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm engaging with the criticism. And what they wanted, basically, they wanted somebody who seemed to be able to take a punch. Because they were being lectured with all this punching up, don't punch down, punch up. And they were seeing me in a place that was superior to them. So they thought taking a swing at me was punching up. And me countering was punching down. Interesting. I wasn't coming at it that way. I was coming at it as a conversation of equals. I'm a gamer, you're a gamer. Let's have a discussion. That's not how they perceived it. And when I adapted my communications, much more productive conversations started happening. Of course, then I got excommunicated by the gaming left for daring to talk to people with whom I disagreed. That's their choice. You know, they were they're still part of that very cutthroat soup in that sector. But I thought that was a very useful lesson. Yes, useful lesson from Gamergate. And that comes back to this high school thing. And when a guy like Joss Whedon, with all his success and all his money and all his power, is still writing off shitty behavior to girls wouldn't bone me in high school, yes, it's a profoundly narcissistic excuse. However, there's probably a core of truth to it, that's when his sense of self got defined. And the problem with a guy like Joss Whedon is his sense of identity, his sense of self did not evolve as his life did. And that's how guys like him end up horribly abusing power. Because they're not individualized enough to recognize the power they wield and use it accordingly, use it responsibly, use it productively. And that's a process everybody has to go through. I hope that I can help you guys start that process here so you don't have to do it the hard way, the way I did it. But one of the things you have to remember is the vast majority of people you know didn't know you in high school, right? They don't know who you were. You can be anyone you want now. The world is not high school. Trust me, the minute I got out in the world, I was a dumb slut instead of a smart nerd. And apparently suddenly I got much better looking too. Weird. But I mean, okay, I was a competitive dancer in high school, so I was actually pretty muscular, which is weird. But, you know, whatever. Maybe that was it. Who knows? It doesn't matter. And that's the point. It doesn't matter. People aren't dealing with who I was then or what I was then. They're dealing with who I am now and what I am now. And I'm very happy not to still be litigating my high school years in my 40s. I talk about it as a point of reference, but I'm not still stuck there. And I mean, this is part of the problem with everything being discussed as tropes. Human beings are not tropes, and far too often human beings get artificially forced into very rigid, unforgiving tropes, like the very rigid binary between being ugly fat nerd girl and hot dumb slut. Same person, different environments, a hair and makeup team later and a stylist. Just shows how superficial those tropes, those sorting of human beings are. But people get really stuck in it. And I think it's in part because most people don't have those very life-altering, jarring experiences that I have. So I'm hoping people will take my word for this. Because you are not who you were in high school. One way or another, you're not, right? Even if you're in university, you're a university student now. You're not a high school student now. That's a very different thing. Universities they don't necessarily, but you are in the process of individuating, meaning becoming an individual person with a unique personality, unique wants and needs, and boundaries. You are no longer part of a collective identity, you know, whether it be your parents or your school or this, that, the next thing. You're no longer just an extension of your parents. You are becoming an individual. Now, this process continues throughout your 20s. Some people insist, some experts say this individuation phase doesn't actually stop until your late 20s. It's 25 to 28 years old. So if you're not reaching 30 yet, don't worry if you don't feel totally individuated, right? You can't be expected to be. And this is a process that sucks because what's happening while you're figuring out who you are as a person, right? Well, you're getting a degree and going into debt. How do I decide what I want to do with my life if I don't know who I am as a person yet? Good question. Totally fair, right? You're going out and trying to get that first job and trying to please employers and bosses and get hired and do work. And it's a lot. Your 20s are that decade where you unlearn your teens. And then your 30s are sort of contextualizing your 20s. Human lives are getting increasingly long. And so the development arcs are more complex. And it does benefit you to do check-ins every so often and see yourself for who you are now, not how you were defined in high school. And I think if you really check in and really get present with who you are as a person who is in university instead of high school, or somebody who has a job instead of being in high school, you'll recognize you're not the same person. You've grown, you've changed, you have a much better sense of who you are and what you want, part of because your shitty experiences in high school. But at some point, in order to be a person, other people want to be around. The high school experience and any difficult period where you had to learn the hard way, that door, that has to go from present to past, right? That has to be something that happened to you, not something that is happening to you. And high school for a lot of people is so fucking traumatic that they never get there. And that's not somebody's fault. But if you can overcome that, you'll be a lot happier. The problem is, and I am wording this very carefully because it's going to be a tender subject. A lot of people who were nerdy, as teenagers, did not get acceptance from their parents. They didn't get that unconditional love. They were the subject of a lot of criticism, people trying to toughen them up, so on and so forth. That means they didn't get the example. They didn't get the building blocks to build self-acceptance the easy way, to be able to recognize who they are, accept and validate who they are, and build from that and decide, do I want to be this person? Do I want to be someone different? Do I want to change? Do I want to develop certain skills? So on and so forth, right? If you have a family of origin that was shitty, that is harder. If you struggled to make friends in your adolescent years, that is harder because these are all learned skills. It is not impossible. You can still do it. And I find it's much easier to just wipe the slate clean in your head. It will take a bit of time, but what happened to you in high school is not still happening. It's over. It's stopped. You don't have to repeat those patterns. Don't be Joss Whedon, because look at Joss Whedon. Dude did a bunch of really cool shit and was miserable the whole time to the point that he ruined his own life. Don't be Joss Whedon, right? Don't be like Joss Whedon. there are other people who grow and change and move into different phases of life and career, and those are the people that, look at a guy like George Clooney. He was on ER and did possibly the worst Batman movie ever made. But now he's this like activist and civil rights guy, and people care about what he says about politics. But I mean, part of what happened to him is he had a very, very serious injury on a movie, and he couldn't do the dumb action movies anymore that he was getting hired to do. The interesting thing too is it was Syriana he got hurt on, and that was one of his attempts to be a more serious actor. But he's not still trying to be the lead on ER, right? He's a different George Clooney now. That's just an example I use. There are a couple of actresses now who are, I mean, you take Betty White, who just worked consistently, but she deliberately, when she went from Mary Tyler Moore to the Golden Girls, she didn't want to play the same character. She wanted to play a different character because it's a new phase in her life, right? And then, she went back to playing more of the character she played on Mary Tyler Moore on subsequent shows, which was kind of amusing for those of us who knew her from Mary Tyler Moore, and kind of confusing for people who only knew her as Rose Nyland, right? But then she had this animal activism streak that has led to this, what would have been her 100th birthday, she, there was this huge boom with people giving to animal charities to the point that some can't keep up. It's a really feel-good story. But there is someone who kept living in the present and kept dealing with what life was giving her at that moment, not trying to go back and recapture, say, oh, the groundbreaking television that was Mary Tyler Moore. She just, no, I want to entertain. And here's this other show that's totally different, but became equally a cultural phenomenon. It's having a resurgence now, right? These are people who are living authentically. These are people who are living in the present. And these are people who know who they are. And you can't know who you are if you're still traumatized from who you were in high school when you weren't a completely developed person, right? So how can you start taking steps? One, put it away. Put high school away. High school is not the pinnacle of your life. It shouldn't be. The problem with people slightly younger than me is that high school was such a pressure cooker that there was no opportunity to do that self-exploration, to try things, maybe fail, express what you wanted to do, as opposed to go to college, get degree, these things, rah, 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 right? Like, people don't learn to know what they want. That takes trial and error. I know there was a lot of things in my life I thought I wanted them, and then I got there and it was like, no, this is kind of gross. I don't really want this. A lot in media. I made a lot of conscious choices that, no, this is not worth my soul. This is what I thought I wanted. This is what I thought would make me happy. It's not time to pivot, right? And that's life. If you're too rigidly determined to keep fighting old battles, you're never going to be able to enjoy your present challenge. And that may sound like a lot to take in, but I see people fighting these nerd fights over and over and over and over again. And it's calling people to task in present day, unintentionally demanding that they make their past experiences feel better. And they can't do that. They can't. Um, Media does not love you. Media doesn't even know you exist. TV and film are linear. Somebody makes it, somebody puts it out, you watch it. You have no control over the outcome there. In a video game, maybe there are different endings, but people still make the game and then you play it. That's not the same as having relationships in your life that affirm you and validate you. You cannot get those relationships from media. You cannot get those relationships by getting hot women. Because hot women is not a person. Hot women is a prop. Or cute guys. My audience is 90-something% male. That's why I tend to use those examples. It's not intended to say that one gender is significantly better or worse than the other on this. I have seen all types of people do this, but part of it is that we get so hung up in high school with media that it people watch this stuff and so they end up there, and there aren't the same deep dives into adult relationships on television the same way it is. I mean, all those CW superhero shows, even the characters that are adults with jobs act like they're in high school. The emotional development is not there because that's not drama, right? No matter what you consume, no matter what media you like, it doesn't matter, because you could watch something with high schoolers and go, like I watched Stargirl. That's about high schoolers. That's sort of the point. But, I have these moments where it's like, I'm looking at them from the point of view of like an adult who cares, not in their ground level the same way. That's an important check you can do. Are you still there emotionally? Are you still there mentally? If you are, what's some things you can do? What's some achievements since? What's some identity-based things since that you can connect to get yourself out of that I'm still in high school mindset? Because you do have to actively separate yourself from meaningful parts of your life that way. High school is a period of big changes, and maybe that's why so many people get stuck. But my whole adult life has been a series of big changes. So, and I mean, you do end up sort of separating into people who have left that behind and people who haven't. And it's really hard as somebody who was sort of forcibly kicked out of that to be around people who are still litigating that, just because I don't want to go back, And so if you want to be around other people who are more accepting of who you are now, who are more mature, who are willing, who can handle opinions that differ from theirs, well, you got to get with that I've moved beyond high school crowd. And the only way you can do that is if you yourself have moved beyond high school. There's no shortcut. There isn't. Because you're constantly going to have issues with the lack of maturity if you can't unstick yourself from that. That doesn't mean nostalgia is a bad thing. That doesn't mean, you can't look back on things and laugh. You should look back on things and laugh. You've got some separation when something that was like traumatic for you at the time makes you chuckle now. 'Cause you've learned and grew and taken from those experiences. Now, that's not something you can force. You have to be gentle with yourself and affirming with yourself and validating yourself who you are now, at whatever stage of life you are at. I am not telling people that they need to start acting like they're in their 40s when they're only 24, right? That's not fair. Enjoy being 24, but 24 isn't 16, right? I know it can feel that way sometimes because of the way people treat you, but this is the beginning of a discussion. I'm interested in what you guys think. What's some ways you check in with who you are now so you're communicating from the present instead of the past? I'm really interested in your comments, and don't forget about Leanna Cares. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.